All right, well, welcome to this property, folks. I know most of you, but some I don't know. So my name's Derek Greenwood, and we've been on this property for over 20 years now. Not as long on the actual cottage property, so there's a lot of newer elements to the permaculture on that property. But yeah, Bishop's Court, we've been there for 22 years. But we're not looking at that. That's more ornamental and historical and cosmetic gardens there. We're looking more at practical things today. So just briefly, I'll give an introduction to permaculture here. Then we'll go for a bit of a walk and talk and look at the different elements, and people can ask questions about why I designed it that way, or I'll just explain the rationale behind why I've used particular species for different things, or relative placement of different structures, things like that. So we'll actually sort of congregate in a couple of shady spots and talk about different things there. When we're finished here, we'll get on the bus and we'll go to another property where there's some swales that are 3 years old, and so we can look at photographs of the design and construction of those swales, and the owners have given me photos of when they were flooding this year. So if you think that it's not possible for swales of that scale to actually flood, then you need to look at these photos, because it's quite inspiring to see a flooded swale, to make sure that you got the dimensions right. It's not over-engineered and never going to fill. It's not under-engineered and floods every time and you waste water that goes onto your neighbour's property, for example. So, and we've got other photos of swales before and during and after that you can have a look at when you're on the bus or when we get to the next venue. Okay, so first of all, how many of you here have actually heard of permaculture, or you've studied it? So most of you. So put your hand up if you thought you were coming to a private salon to get a new type of hairdo. Nobody's game to put their hand up? Right. Okay. So it sounds like I'm preaching to the converted. So maybe we should all go home. Okay. You got to put me through the mill. All right. So a brief rundown of permaculture from my understanding of it. It's about design for sustainable human settlement, and it comes with ethics, and the ethics are care of the earth, care of people, and then the return of surplus to the other two. So if you've got excess resources, whether it's time or money or produce, give it away, make donations to Flora and Fauna, make donations to World Wildlife Fund or Sea Shepherd or whatever interest you might have, so that they can do good work for the, caring for the earth with that money. But yeah, you can join the Flora and Fauna Society, do some tree planting and weeding and those sort of things, to just part of your giving back to the earth. One example of us giving back here is where a large tank overflows. I've diverted it so it goes straight into an old well that used to be used when the hospital was functioning here, and the Melanesian Mission owned this property. So that water is going directly into the aquifer, where hopefully someone with a bore nearby can withdraw it at a later date. So rather than just having it overflow on the ground and running down your driveway, scouring out your road, flooding your cattle stop, creating a nuisance, you convert it into a resource, even if it's hard to get back. That's the concept. Right. So there are numerous guiding principles to aid the designer. So the ones that studied with Jody will probably know some of them, but I'll just read them out for those that haven't done any real theory on it. So everything works in many ways, and everything is connected to everything else. every function is supported by many elements, and every element should serve many functions. So an element might be a veggie garden, so it's providing flowers for bees and food for the family and food to give away. It might be covering a bare patch of ground that would otherwise be baking in the sun, and the earthworms perishing because it's desiccated and those sort of things. That's a bit of an example of that. Another important one is to use everything at its highest value. So if you've got a Rolls Royce, you don't use it to plough the potatoes. You'd use it at a much higher value, just as an extreme sort of an example. Use biological resources to do work, and the best example is, say, chickens. Using chickens to do your insect control and weed control in a chook run, and they're converting that into fertiliser. So they're providing the action of a tractor doing that cultivating. They're saving you on the use of pesticides, and they're getting their own feed, or part of their own feed, and saving you money and having to buy pellets to feed them, on that. The last one, work where it counts is another one. So only do things that are necessary. So if it isn't broken, don't fix it. That's a good analogy that I can use for you. And the last one is that the problem is the solution. So where you've got, the problem might be overgrown vegetation along your driveway, that material becomes a resource by putting it through a wood chipper, and that gives you material that you can either make compost or mulch for your fruit trees. So the problem at one area becomes the solution to another area. So it's another example of everything working in many ways. Your waste becomes a resource. All right. So permaculture design, it combines the best practice and the best ideas from many disciplines, such as architecture, engineering, horticulture, agronomy, as we recently got taught by Jason Lynch, companion planting. You'll see that in practice up in these gardens. Forestry, biology, botany, entomology, as was shown by Anthony Rice in earlier seminars, and regenerative agriculture as practiced by Graham Sate. They all have great ideas and great best practice for incorporating into permaculture design. I prefer the earlier term of biological agriculture because it reflects the incredible range of scientific understanding that is required. You have to combine plant biology with animal biology, with chemistry, with physiology, ecology, hydrology, geology, etc. And the other term that they've changed it to is regenerative agriculture, because there was connotations with the word biological being related to biological warfare. But biological warfare is another name for the Green Revolution, when weapons of war were turned against nature, and for that nature deserves an apology. So permaculture promotes the concepts of organic gardening and biodynamics. That's a superlative form of organics, as dictated by that ethic of the care for the earth. It also promotes the reduce, reuse and the recycle philosophy, which a lot of us do here because of the price of materials and often the shortage of materials on Norfolk Island. And on that note, we have a couple of examples just as we first enter the gardens. Firstly, the shed that you come to has been through several life cycles on Norfolk Island. It was a shed at the property on Queen Elizabeth Avenue, which used to belong to the Bailey family, where Governor's Lodge is now. No, I think it was the property next door.
Oh, okay, yeah, that little, I remember that.
Yeah. Anyway, that shed then was acquired by the local archery club. So they used it out on Mission Road, where they stored a bit of archery equipment, but including their targets. So you might have a wild boar and a bear and a lion and a stag and a few other bits and pieces associated with that archery sport. But then they got a bit of money together and they built their own new clubhouse and a larger storeroom. They advertised that building free of charge, as is where is. So I contacted them, hired a crane truck, and $80 later we had a shed right where it is now. It required a bit of maintenance here and there, so that was done and it was repainted, and Andrea's turned it into a sort of an office cum garden shed. Yeah, you can have a look in it as we go past. Now the second structure is a is one that is using repurposed materials. So you'll see what I mean when we get there. So there's a little bit of a background tale that I'll give with that, and that is about 18 months ago, a couple of aliens crashed their flying saucer in the lawn at the front of Bishop's Court. All right, you'll get the picture when you see this structure. Now we were fearing a visit from NASA and the CIA and KGB to come and confiscate it, and the way they would get interested. So we decided we would hide this craft and then camouflage it as that gazebo that you now see. So, and if you're wondering what happened to the crew of the spaceship, they actually morphed into human form, got jobs with the regional council, and they're now running the planning and environment department. And Phil's not here. I was trying to stir Phil, so Tara has to cop it all. Okay, so the garden contains many different elements, each with their relevant functions. We've got the residence, we've got water tanks, we've got sheds, shade house, a potting up bench, a chook run that was once an aviary for the green parrot breeding program. And we don't have chooks anymore, but we still use it to keep the feral chooks out. We've got a mixed orchard with stone fruits and subtropicals. There's an avocado and banana orchard. There's windbreaks, trellises and swales. And numerous garden beds, including hugelkultur bed that's only relatively new. We'll talk about that in more detail if people want to know more when we get there. And 2 veggie pods as sold by Nibs. There are also 2 fashion models on duty in the gardens today. They are recycled store dummies. They had broken legs or broken hips at one stage, so maltreated by their previous employer. Anyway, there's a bit of maintenance required to get them to be able to look like models again and be stood up, but so they sort of are just ornaments within the garden. They just add another layer of interest to the garden. Their names, by the way, is Felicity and Sandra. I forgot to mention that there's going to be a short quiz at the end of the tour, so we'll ask that you pay attention as we go around. So these elements provide many functions such as shelter, food, flowers, and just the sheer aesthetics of a beautiful garden to work in and wander through. So I think with that we'll start on a wander through. When you get to the the spaceship construction, go inside and have a look at the little diorama that's there. There's a couple of printouts with all of the functions of permaculture, not the functions, the principles of permaculture, and there's another one on the benefits of mulch. But there's also a couple of questions there that you need to lift the lid to reveal the answer to it. So I'll be interested to get people's feedback on that too. All right, so it's going to be pretty spread out, but I'll give people a yell when we're due to sort of congregate at the next spot where there's another bit of a demonstration to show you. So yeah, just the path's pretty narrow, so just try and stay on the path to avoid trampling the stuff. You can ask questions of me or my wife or others who might know the name of plants or fruit trees and things, and we'll just try and get our way through up to the next stage. So, all right, let's go and have a walk.
Can we take photos?
First question that was asked was, what's this tree? There must be people here who recognise this tree. Yep, lily.
White sapote?
Yep. So white sapote, or Casimiroa is its name. It's a South American native. It gets about the size of a quince or a China pear, maybe not quite as big as a China pear, but size of a quince. When it's mature, the skin on this variety goes a sort of a pale yellowy, greeny yellow, and it's got very thin flesh, very thin skin I should say, but the flesh has got the consistency of say butter or avocado, and it tastes a fair bit like a vanilla custard to eat it. So it's quite sweet, quite messy to eat. It'll just, you know, dissolve in your hands and in your mouth. But this is a very good variety because of the crop that you can see on it. There's, I don't know, who can give me an estimate of how many fruit? 1,000, 2,000? It's a lot of fruit. So it's good for birds as a decoy. It might keep them off one of my other crops if they've got plenty of food here. Even if they only hammer my crop half as much, that's worthwhile, because there's far more fruit on there than I can eat. So I'm quite happy to share that with the birds. But the other reason we stopped here was to look at some examples of recycling and reusing and repurposing again. So similar to the spaceship, which everyone hopefully recognised was what I was alluding to with how it arrived here. The wheelbarrow, it was at the Waste Management Centre about to go into the car crusher. So it had rusty steel components, they were bent.
Good save.
Yeah, well it took a few hours of work to restore it, but I was at least going to salvage the plastic tub. But when I looked at the structure of it, I could do a bit of panel beating and treated the rust, bought a whole new set of bolts, reassembled it, put some new shoes on the back because it helps to slow it down. If you're going down a hill, you can dig those shoes in the ground. And the beauty of it is that it's so light that one person can wheel it with one hand when it's empty. That's how light it is and well balanced. There's only one problem that I found, is that I can't get it away from Andrea. It's become her favourite wheelbarrow.
You did it for her.
Yes, it seems like it. It seems like it. Right. Most women would recognise this. Good old Hoover washing machines. I can use that to spread wood chip, or you can, you know, pick up bits of rubbish around the property and put it in. But for using it as wood chip, I've got a handle on it, and there's a little finger hole in the bottom so you can tip it out. Now, how many people have bought those plastic tubs from Martin Cross, and how long have they lasted? You got a good one. Right. Okay, so that'll last you 30 years, maybe more. Now my son, with the fishing business, he saw that that was a great way to use it as a fish drainer for his fillets. So he pulled apart a washing machine, cut it down a little bit so it wasn't too heavy to lift, and made himself a drainer out of that. His mother wasn't too happy, but had to buy a new one. Yeah, they take a couple of hours to get out of the washing machine. They're not easy. People commented about this machete on Saturday's seminar with Anthony. It's made out of the bar of a chainsaw, and if you look on the back you can still see the groove where the chain ran around it. So just a bit of time on a grinder and you can cut off that edge with the groove in it, sharpen it down to a good sharp edge, and just make a rivet and put the handle on it, and I use that for cutting up bananas. It's really good steel in this. It takes a good sharp edge quite readily, and it's going to last me until I get another chainsaw bar that's the same. Now this is just an example of just keeping a tool and doing the repairs on it to keep it going. So this is probably 30 years old, this pitchfork, and it's the original handle, but it had a couple of breaks in it. So rather than just throw the handle away, it was easier to just glue it back together again. Otherwise you've got to go to the hardware store and buy a brand new one at whatever cost. It's been imported, so make things last as long as you can. You'll be aware that there's a lot of new buzzwords around with all these new green movement and the like, and ecologically sustainable development and so forth. Well, this thing has now got a title. It's called a productivity stimulator. This tool is obviously recycled from an axe, and it's just had a couple of bits of reinforcing down the side and bolted through to a heavy bit of recycled pipe, which was quite bent when I found it. So the pipe wasn't much good for anything else, but for a tool like this it's perfect because it's got the weight, not quite the weight of a heavy crowbar, but we just call it the big chopper. It's ideal for digging post holes when you run across tight soil, or it's good for chopping tree roots when you're constructing swales and you need to just trim them up as you go. It's also very good for getting banana suckers off the main parent, because you can slide it down between the pups and the adult and then break it out. So it's much easier than trying to use a mattock or a spade to do it. So it's quite a versatile tool. A lot of the modern tradesmen don't know how to use it because they can't find the power switch on it. So, but yep, the good old two-stroke is the engine that drives this one.
Are we allowed to take a photo of that?
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
I'll let you put it away and I'll take a photo of it because my son will build one.
Yeah, well,
That's
it's
allowed.
very easy to
For sure that's going to happen.
very easy to make.
Yeah, awesome.
So this is another example of repurposing. Just a 25 litre drum made out of UV stabilised plastic, so it's very durable. And I actually invented, well, I can't say claim to be the original inventor, but I wanted to go fishing one day about 40 years ago, and I had an old canvas backpack, and when I picked it up, the straps broke away from it because the material had rotted, and there's no way I was going to carry that down the Blackbank cliffs. So I found one of these buckets, got the jigsaw out, cut the opening. I didn't put that on until later, but that came out of here. So I've recycled the waste down here to make an extra little pocket that you can put your chopping board in it. So when you're down on the rocks, you've got a chopping board to save your knife from cutting on against the rocks. The hole where the lid went on, that becomes a hole for your telescopic fishing rod to go in. And the handle still gives you the opportunity to carry it round on the rocks by hand rather than by the straps, which you probably recognise straps like that. They've just come out of a car wreck as seat belts. It's very durable, very strong fabric. It's just lasts many, many years, that seatbelt webbing. So you don't need to buy a backpack. The other green one here, that's been out to Phillip Island many times because it's just so convenient to pass on and off a boat. And if you use a double liner of garbage bags, you can tie them off at the top and then it's waterproof. So if you do drop it in the water, it's going to float and you've got a chance to recover it without getting your camera and your food and your other equipment saturated inside it. So it's more practical than the other backpacks, which would get thoroughly wet if you drop them in the water. The plastic, the water just runs straight off. So look at materials in a different way. Look at how you might use them. I studied industrial arts and metalwork when I went to school, and so I had a bit of an understanding about materials technology, and then Andrea's father was a builder and carpenter, so I learned a lot of woodworking skills off him too. So that's the sort of skills that are really useful. If you've got your own property, you can make things, you can repair things, you can design things, you can utilise a wider range of material. I think that's about it for that side of things. I think we might move over to the next patch, and we'll talk about mulch and other aspects of that orchard over there. So how many of you know what this tree is above us? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Not very many. Well, it's actually a legume. It's called an ice cream bean. Inga edulis is the Latin name, if you need to know it. But you can see it's got immature fruit on it at the moment. That pod will puff out to about the size of a broad bean seed, and then it will develop seeds along that like a bean. And the part that you eat is not the seed, it's the fluffy white fleshy covering of those seeds that fill that cavity between the pod and the bean. And it's got a flavour and a texture that's similar to, say, eating fairy floss that's flavoured like vanilla ice cream. So that's how it got that name. So it's a nitrogen fixer, so it's a good companion for other fruit trees. It's a magnificent shade tree for that, but it's getting a bit too aggressive towards my avocado, so I sacrifice some yield from that. It makes reasonably good wood chips if you have to prune it back, but it's also quite ornamental. You can see the beautiful flowers on it, and it can produce fruit over about 3 or 4 months. So you see we've got some fruit that's advanced like that, and then others that is just flowering. So that's about 4 weeks behind this now. So we're going to have quite a long supply of fruit just from this one tree.
How old is that tree?
Planted in about 2008. Then it was transplanted in 2012, so 10 years ago it was transplanted from next door. So were the avocados, they were transplanted in 2012 at roughly 4 years age. So they're all yielding.
What height was it when it was transplanted?
It was only about that high at 4 years old. There's quite a few of them around the island now. I think Mark Scott sold a few. Rosemary Quintal sold a few. Rosalie Quintal. They'll grow easily just from seed. And yeah, well this was only from seed. There's another variety on the island as well, which I don't have. Slightly different appearance to this one.
What's your opinion on its potential to be weed?
It depends on how far people spread it.
Yeah.
Birds aren't spreading it,
Yeah.
so it's only people. Again, we come back to the toilet seat and
Yeah,
the person you saw in there. Yeah.
So no birds eat it.
No, I don't think birds do, but rats do. Rats love it. Yeah. So they'll often eat the early ones, and which is a nuisance if there's not very many early ones. It's hard to get a crop, and it's hard to pick the ones that are up high. Yeah. But
Seeds are that
you can climb the tree.
They're big.
Yeah. The seed's about the size of a broad bean seed. Yeah. But if you've got the space, it's well worth planting. It's a delicious fruit. Not everyone likes them, but I like sweet fruit, and this is terrific. That first mouthful, the texture is just like fairy floss. It just sort of melts in your mouth, and then there's a slightly chewier part of the flesh that's around the seed itself. So, but it's still got that nice vanilla, sweet flavour. Right. Yeah, they're all babies, so they go a bit feral under the tree, but we just keep mowing them off. They're quite hard to pull out by hand. They get a very deep taproot, so they're fairly drought hardy as well. Over here I've got some just different types of mulch for people that aren't familiar with different mulches. On this first pile here is just purely made out of banana leaves that have been through the wood chipper. So it's all just soft leaf and fibre. This one is a mixture of avocado and ice cream bean that's gone through, so it's got a little bit more woodiness to it, but still a lot of leaf, so still a lot of nitrogen in that leaf to help break it down. And this one it's a bit of a cocktail as well. It's got bamboo and a little bit of can't remember what it was, mulberry in it, but that was just the nature of the things that we were cutting at the time. But
You wouldn't put the three of them together?
that creates work.
Oh, okay.
Why wouldn't I just throw them all on the ground and let it break down there?
Yeah, well,
That-
I was just wondering. Like
If you wanted to make
were
compost, you could
it.
use them in layers, yeah.
Because like this middle one is green, right?
Yeah,
So this is
so add it to
different
the
components,
brown.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I still advocate putting your mulch straight onto the ground. I don't need to make the compost, I just use the mulch on the surface, and I just let earthworms and the other soil organisms and fungi and bacteria and algae, they're all breaking it down on the surface.
Yeah.
So I'm using those biological resources to do the work that I would have to spend to make compost. I don't have to physically shovel the stuff 2 or 3 times to make the product. It's happening naturally at that interface between your soil and the mulch. You'll find that worms come up to it from below. Things like centipedes and millipedes and spiders and what are those other things? Little shrimp-like things. I can't remember what they're called. Yeah, springtails. Yep, springtails will work their way through it. So this is the food source that you need to cause them to multiply their populations. They, in turn, convert that all into fertiliser pellets and excrete it wherever they travel. So that fertiliser then becomes water soluble when you get rain, and once it's water soluble, it can pass through the cell walls of your ice cream bean feeder roots, because they have very fine filaments, and that solution of nutrient and water passes through those cell walls and taken up by the plant. So that's the process by which the plant gets the benefit from the organisms that are feeding on the leaf litter or the mulch that you put underneath.
You use olive? Yeah?
Olive, yeah, I've used just about everything, even Phillip Island hibiscus. Yeah. It costs a bit more.
Yeah.
5 years in jail if you get busted. Yeah, but that's another story.
When you chip it and pruning out,
It dies off naturally.
Leave that file.
yeah.
That's right. If you mix it with the soil is going to have to find the nitrogen to help to break it down. So you just leave it on the surface, and provided there's enough green material in it, it will help that carbon to break down.
So you chip when it's green.
Preferably, yeah. The machine likes it better when it's green. It's not as hard. The moisture helps to lubricate the knives and keep them cooler.
It's interesting, I was consulting at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Singapore, and unlike Singapore where there's just leaf blowers and you can't have any rubbish anywhere, including chewing gum is illegal in the streets, this place has got mulch this thick on it, and the guy who runs it, he's a botanist slash microbiologist, Indian guy, several degrees actually, but he gets just constant complaints. What's all the mess? This is supposed to be an iconic, part of this Botanic Gardens. And he takes offence to it, to the point that he'll go to their hotels and explain, but what he's got is 8 published papers showing that the very best soil life stimulant of everything that you can conceivably use is the leaves from deciduous trees. So nature knows what it's doing. It shuts off the nitrogen, the leaf goes red, yellow and drops. It has it does its work over winter and provides all of that nutrition and biological stimulation for the plant to kick off in spring. It's just how it works, and people blow it away,
Yeah.
So this model's the way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nature's got a few million years on us.
I reckon so.
And so we're kidding ourselves if we think we can design something better.
Exactly.
Really kidding ourselves. Yeah.
Too much interference.
Yeah.
Too much interference.
Yeah. Over here I've got we talk a bit about avocados. So this one variety, this is just the shell because they've long finished. This variety, they're all just putting out new fruit. But that's just one of the varieties that I've got, one of the 8. So over the years I selected varieties around the island that had superior quality avocados. They were either superior in terms of their flesh, or the season that they ripened, or the small seed that they had, or thin skin, those sort of things are all desirable things to look for. And so I had a collection that can give fruit all year round. There's early trees that can come in April, and there's mid-season, and then there's late trees like Hass, which we'll walk under shortly, and it's still got a crop of green avocados, some of which it'll still be carrying hopefully in April next year or May, if I don't eat them all before then, if rats don't eat them all before then. But yeah, those particular varieties have that amazing ability to hold those fruit for that another 5 or 6 months as I pick them gradually over time. However, the trees that have got a heavy crop this year that are holding them for that long, they're not setting any fruit for the following year. The mother is saying, I've got enough to keep alive at the moment. I'm not going to flower and produce another 500 or 1,000 fruit until I can have a rest, and so it'll have a rest next year. when I've finished harvesting it. So not all the trees behave that same way. Some drop their fruit. They're all finished by beginning of July. No matter what the season is, they might start ripening in April, but then by July the tree has dropped them, or I've eaten them, or rats have eaten some and we've eaten others.
Do they cross-pollinate or are they self-pollinating avocados? I know nothing about avocados.
I don't know, but some require pollination and some are self-pollinating. I've got,
But if they're all like, do they cross over with the flowering? Like if they're all different ones, have you got more than 2 per variety? Of the
yes, more than
avocado?
2. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, more than 2 trees
Yes.
of those varieties. Yeah,
Yes.
I've got about 6 of the Hass, the late ones, and 3 of them have got heavy crops, and the other 3 are producing heavy crops for next year.
Yeah, right.
They all the varieties flower at around the same time, which is about September. So even though they're all flowering at the same time, some of them can hold the fruit for like 20 months, 18 months. The others only hold them until, you know, as I said, like June or July, and then they have a rest, and then they flower again and produce another, you know, medium crop, continuously. And so it's taken a while to sort of learn the behaviour in my property and to manage them so that I've got that a number of trees that have got a heavy crop every year, so that I can go right through. So I can have a season that's about 13 months long, which is
It's really
amazing.
great.
It's
Which is what I
really
want.
interesting with the food pyramid, because for 50 years we've lived with the concept that the base of the food pyramid was 55% carbohydrates, and then you had your protein, and then you had your fats at the top occupying less than 20%, and that whole food pyramid now has been inverted, and the whole deal is 50% fat of your total calorific intakes at the base, complete changeover.
Yeah.
Protein and carbohydrates just a small amount, the less than 20% amount. But the big finding is, you know, it's about good quality fat, and that you're looking at the best quality of all fats, the wonderful flavour,
Yeah.
fatty component. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great food, and it's well, there's days when we don't eat an avocado because we've
No, I never have
we're
done
eating it far too frequently.
I eat them every day, never get sick of
You
it.
can eat them every yeah.
Is that Alex Carr?
No, that's not one of Cars.
Okay.
No, it's from Cascade, but not from Cars.
The other fascinating thing from
Small seed in this one too.
Oh, sorry, from your mention is the mother. This finding relative to microbiology of this finding of the existence of this system underneath the soil called the mycorrhizal network, where there's this massive network based on mycorrhizal fungi, where that serves as like an underground internet, where there's this communication between trees and microbes and microbes and microbes and microbes and plants and trees and each other, but it extends through to this finding in rainforests that the seed will drop and it might be carried by a bird or blow 400 metres away, and the mother still knows who her babies are. And when these little trees can't get carbon, this mycorrhizal network's not just an information network, you can put hard goods along it, so she pumps carbon via the network just to her baby
Wow.
to keep her baby alive. It's phenomenal to think. It's,
Yeah.
yeah,
But so that's undisturbed though.
yeah.
Like you're like,
Until we
so
mess up.
nobody goes in there and starts digging.
Yeah,
Chopping up
Yeah,
the
so
trees.
it's
you disrupt
undisturbed
that whole
network, yeah.
pathway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Derek, if you
Right.
pick the avocados off the tree before they drop,
Yeah.
would that encourage the tree to
Yes,
earlier?
it does. So as I was learning this, I realised I had to start stripping one tree early so it would flower for
You
me
still eat them,
when the
it
time.
just take a while to ripen.
As long as they're physically mature on the tree, they'll ripen, but they have to reach that physical maturity. Otherwise, they've got an immature flavour to them.
It's hard to pick, isn't it?
Yeah,
You see the other
you just
one on the way in?
trial and error. You just pick one and see if the flavour is mature or if it's still immature. Anyway, we'll go over a bit further. There's a trellis. Now the trellis is serving many functions. It's actually on the boundary between us and our neighbour, so it's a boundary fence.
Yeah.
But it's also supporting 2 or 3 varieties of passion fruit, and it's also got kiwi fruit on it.
Oh, really?
So, which I'm still waiting for it to bear well, because there's you need male and female
Yeah, you
to
do.
pollinate. So I think I've got both, but it's just a question of whether there's
What
enough.
variety on the end is that passion fruit?
There's two varieties that we can see, but there's cannonball, like these just down here, which someone can crack if they want to try them. And there's the Hawaiian passion fruit.
Oh, it's the Hawaiian. That's what it is,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, so we've had some of the early Hawaiians and some of the early cannonballs as well. So again, with fruit varieties, choose varieties that ripen consecutively. So passion fruit are a good one. There's half a dozen species of passion fruit on the island that ripen at different times of the year.
Right.
So there's the what's it called, Fijian red and the Fijian gold, as well as the black, you know, Ned Kelly passion fruit. There's the two over here. There's banana passion fruit.
You got banana passion fruit there?
Well, it's been here. I don't know if it's still here. I've had it here and lost it.
Oh, beautiful.
So hopefully someone else has still got them growing. But
When
they all
grow
ripen
them-
at different times of the year.
Yeah, perfect.
So you don't have to eat the same passion fruit.
They're not grafted though. You can get them from the seed.
Yeah, they're good from seed. Yeah, it's not worth the effort of grafting them.
Yeah, no, I planted two in Stanthorpe, and Stanthorpe is frosty like really badly.
Yeah,
Like you can only grow them under protected places. But I've built a new tank, and it's next to the shed, and I put a trellis around the tank.
right.
And I figured that the water in the tank would never be below 0,
Yeah,
and so the passion fruit is unreal.
yeah, using
it's-
that
it's-
heat,
Yeah, it's
the heat from the body of water
from the body of water.
as a
yeah.
microclimate.
Yeah,
Works
Yeah,
actually,
yeah,
it's just thriving.
yeah. Yeah, we didn't talk about microclimates, but I don't know how much time we've got to cover all of the bases. But on Norfolk, you need a hedge to stop strong winds. If you get exposed to the salt wind, this paddock used to have a crop of coffee in it, so 20 years ago, and that was a failed venture on this property, and it was removed, and so you had one big long open paddock. When the winds came from the southwest, it would run for 3 or 4 days at 30 knots and carry salt all the way inland and burn your crops. It just couldn't tolerate that salt content in that wind. So I planted the windbreaks of the big bamboo that you'll see. We'll go for a walk over there. But that's the neighbour's property now because we sold that property.
South Africa.
Yeah, just to reduce the workload on us and reduce our land rate liabilities as well.
Just subdivide.
Yeah, boundary adjustment it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you can do that, can you?
Oh yeah, you can do boundary adjustments. It's easier than a subdivision.
Okay.
There's limits for subdivision as to what the minimum thresholds and that are.
Did that on my farm.
Yeah.
Well, it might be just a
Hey, Derek,
So-
you got a lot of brunging on your
We can make
avocado
it a
leaves.
keeper.
Someone said it's a lack of boron, but is there some other logic to that? Or is there
You get a lot of what on your leaves? Brown.
just the leaves are brunging off, going brown on me.
Tip of them.
And I thought at first it was salt air, but someone said it's a lack of boron. And
No, I don't
trace
think it's
elements?
boron. Graham might be able to know.
Sorry?
On avocado leaves, what causes the tip of the leaf to go brown?
Potassium.
Lack of potassium.
Yeah, but they're very, very heavy potassium users, but they're also, when we talk about boron, just insanely heavy users. There's no plant that comes close to them, and it's so important before, boron's used to increase pollination, increase the fruit to flower ratio. So you've got this massive flowering with avos, and they have amongst the 5 lowest fruit to flower ratios of any plant, and just putting on usually 2 kilos of boron as a foliar spray, which is the highest rate for any plant. Usually it's 1 kilo per hectare. They use 2 kilos plus they put through 2 or 3 kilos through irrigation, and that just before flowering lengthens the male pollen tube and doubles the fruit to flower ratio, so you get twice as many fruit. Just that one little trick.
Right.
It's tremendous.
Is that the
Right.
same mango?
No, the mangoes are still quite boron hungry, but not as hungry as these guys. But all fruit, without exception, and all vegetables, tomatoes included, everything will benefit from a boron poly spray before flowering. It has a tremendous, like when you get, say, corn, and you've got this much at the top that doesn't fill, that's a classic example of a boron deficiency. You haven't pollinated, you haven't filled the end, you haven't pollinated to the end of the growing tip. So it can make a massive difference, and everyone neglects it. In fact, we've done all the soil tests here, and these soils are really boron deficient. So it's something that needs to be brought into the equation.
Yeah. Well, I do supplement these trees with boron about every second year,
Yeah, that's good.
like maybe a couple of handfuls per tree now that they're this big. So I try and scatter that across the whole orchard.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there was something else that you said I was going to cover, but I've forgotten that now. Anyway,
So the one thing that's most linked to the on-year, off-year phenomenon, and you described it when they carry them longer, that's potassium usually. So
Right.
if you can really boost up that potassium, we don't have, none of our growers have on-year, off-year, even though they used to. And it's about doing a leaf test after you've harvested, finding exactly what the plant needs and giving it exactly what it wants. But part of that is always potassium. The big year, massive amounts of potassium are required to grow any fruit, and you suck that potassium, so the next year plant says, I haven't got enough to do it, so it does half
Yeah.
the amount of fruit.
right, so
you
that's the
top up
reason
at that
why it
time.
can't.
Yeah. So it's always post-harvest that you top up.
Yeah.
Your leaf test. Leaf test is just, what do you want, plant? Oh, that's what you want, and you give it to it. And
Right.
often through the leaf, because you bypass things that are locking things up in the soil.
Okay.
Yeah. Because what
Alright.
you've got from a lock-up point of view in these soils in Norfolk is the red colour is iron oxide, and iron is just so antagonistic of about 6 or 7 other minerals.
Yeah.
So that's why foliar spraying has a huge potential. You use a backpack spray and just go, a still backpack spray and just cover the whole thing. That
Yeah,
way.
a blower.
Yeah, blower.
Yeah.
Have you got one of them?
No, I don't.
You should get one.
No, great
Yeah.
Christmas
I've
tree
got
list.
one.
Yeah.
They're amazing. So when I did the course with Graham 8 years ago, that's one thing I took away from the course, amongst lots of other things. But he said, at the end of the course, I asked him, I said, what is it that are the most important things, And I said, what kind of fertilizer for me? Is
Yeah.
it black gold? Is it great all-rounder?
Yeah.
And the other thing he pointed out is have a still mister.
Yeah.
And they're
They can do
fantastic
like 20
tools.
feet, so you do
They're heavy though,
Yeah, I've
they're
seen
heavy. Like
Mitchell
I
has one.
struggle a little bit when I have that full with the machine
15
and
litres.
yeah, plus the whole machine
it's
is on
quite
the
a weight,
back.
yeah.
It's quite, I've like got to brace myself.
Yeah.
But it's a great machine.
Yeah.
It's a great machine, well worth
Yeah.
having.
But the potential of permaculture, even in the agriculture model, I was doing this training for broadacre growers in Rockhampton, and we couldn't have the normal CWA hall because the women had their meeting that particular time when I was coming up to do a talk. So there was a guy there who's in their group, and it's all guys with 3,000 and 4,000, but he's just a permaculture teacher, and he's got a 20-acre permaculture farm. And what he'd done was buy the worst soil. It was in an area called Yeppoon, which has actually got nice soils, but he bought this piece of crap. You can drive from Brisbane to Cairns and think, oh, I'm going into the subtropics if you've not done it before, and it's just this garbage, clay and gravel with nothing on it. I don't know who owns all that soil, but you do 1,000 kilometres of the worst soils, possibly, certainly in Queensland. Well, he bought that soil, housed one goat literally on a rope.
Yeah.
And so what he did with swales, so the concept of swales, have you explained that?
We're going to deal with that at the end of
Okay.
this, or when we go to the second property.
Yeah, okay, well then you
Yeah.
can explain it then. But basically it's stolen, the concept, and it wasn't really acknowledged, but a guy called P.K. Yeomans came up with this
Yep.
thing called contour farming, which was Australian national policy for 16 years. I mean, that's what we did, and
Yeah.
that was, he had a wonderful book called Water for Every Farm, where he showed that 90% of what falls on your soil ends up in the river and the ocean, and you want to trap as much as possible in your teachers, and you can explain that when we get to the swale
Yeah.
thing. So this guy did swales,
Yeah.
the big drain, taking the dirt from the drain, still got clay and gravel garbage. Then he used a harvester, a combine harvester he borrowed, and an absentee person next door, he mowed theirs, and he got cardboard from Harvey Norman's, a whole truckload of it, laid that out on all of these swales the whole way down the hillside, put this cardboard down, then put this mulch about this thick,
Yeah.
then had a compost heap on the top, and everything was planted with a jam tin of compost, and everything conceivable, the whole diversity story of legumes and fruit and vegetables,
Yeah.
just packed in there.
Yeah.
Backpack sprayer, foliar spraying them. I walked through along the rows and just and foliar sprayed them. Both aerated and anaerobic tanks, and then there's a gravity fed down onto it. And he's feeding 45 families who pay $80 a week for a box full of assorted things.
Yeah, wow.
And so the idea that we can't feed 10 billion people is just total crap. You
Yeah.
feed 100 billion with your eyes closed
Yeah.
if you apply the permaculture principles into that
Yeah.
scenario. And he's recycled everything. The toilets were all bits and pieces he's got from the dump, and it's so
Yeah,
good to see.
yeah, right.
It's just such a good model.
Yeah. There was a woman called Esther Dean who had a no-dig garden concept. So I think it was about the 1960s she put out her book. Yeah. Well, she created gardens. She could do it on bare concrete, but she just started with lucerne hay, about 4 inches thick. It comes off in little, it's like biscuits out of a bale. Laid that on the ground. She would dig little holes in it and put a handful of compost and the seedling, very much to what this guy did. And then she used straw mulch on the top and then watered the whole lot, and the plant grew at about the same rate of decomposition of the lucerne hay. So she would get a crop just sitting on bare dirt. You do not need soil to grow. You could just grow stuff on this decomposing organic matter, and then you just top it up with more lucerne hay when it's broken down. You know, it'll get thinner over time because it's all
Well, in his
decomposed.
case, he had all these cut and drop legumes everywhere, so he'd just go through and just
Yeah,
drop them
right.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And so now it was 2 years in, and he pulled back, and he's got this much topsoil that's grown.
Yeah,
Just this beautiful.
because
thing
the
from
earthworms
nothing.
take all the
Yeah.
compost and that down into
Yeah.
the soil, change the structure,
Yeah.
change the
Perfect
fertility.
example of what's
Yeah.
possible on the worst soils in the world.
last garden before I came here.
What was that say?
Exactly, just the lucerne hay on.
Yeah,
Yeah, and because I've got her book, No Dig Garden.
yeah, yeah. No, it was a great book. I read that years ago.
You
Yeah,
Banana fruit, which is
Yeah, very rich.
banana. Is the skin. Plants, are they rich?
Yeah, the skin's got a lot of potassium, and a lot of banana growers will take the plant, will actually recycle it and compost it.
Is there much potassium in the soil?
Well, the banana growers recycle, you know, they
I put it there to
potassium and
crack
it's
if people
got more-
wanted
it's
to
double the
try
size.
eating one.
So they're recycling all of the cut bananas because you can't.
Oh no, no, I planted it
You can do
here.
the anaerobic compost, the fast tracks the compost and you cover it, and it takes 2 months instead of 6 months, and then they're recycling that to get back some of the potassium and the other nutrients.
Well, like is this bananas and bam? And molasses?
Yeah, anyway.
Right, okay. Well, come down and have a look at the passion fruit and we'll do a walk down there. With regards to the trellis, I saw the trellis where the kiwi fruit were growing on another property, and that trellis had so much kiwi fruit vine and fruit on it that his trellis broke. So when I designed this, I thought, right, I'm going to go heavy duty so that there's no chance of it breaking on me. So it's a little bit of overkill.
Shade cloth on one side as well.
Yeah,
You'll see a trellis that's about to break.
okay. I put shade cloth on it originally because the bamboo had only just been planted, so I needed the shade cloth as my windbreak. But now the bamboo has gotten so tall and vigorous, its roots are coming across on my property. They're travelling more than 6 metres across into here. So it's time to get a ripper and deep rip along my neighbour's side, which he's happy for me to pay for. And that way those roots won't be robbing the nutrient from my avocados and from my passion fruit and kiwi fruit. So it's just another little thing to think about with your management. These olive trees, their roots would be all the way into the avocados as well. They go a surprising distance. Hmm? Yeah, I wish they shouldn't have planted it, should they? Yeah. But they're quite happy for me to chip all that bamboo as well, so I can get all the chip. And the problem is the solution. Yeah, that's my next source of mulch. So. There's another row of bamboo further down there, and I've still got the shade cloth on this trellis here.
So the kiwi fruit, where is that?
No, it's down.
Underneath here? Underneath?
It's further down, a bit further down.
Okay.
So we'll go for a walk
Passion
along
fruit
there. No, not with this passion fruit. This is the only place where this passion fruit's growing.
Yeah.
It produces more
But
than
the
enough
kiwi
fruit.
fruit is by itself? Or is it
more or less.
companion planted with something else?
No, there are some other passion fruit with it.
Okay.
They're not as aggressive as this one,
Yep.
not as healthy. But
And you
bananas
never
are
ever prune
keeping.
this, hey? You never ever prune it.
No,
No.
no, the bananas are taking too much of the sunlight from the kiwi fruit and the passion fruit, so I've got to get in with my little homemade machete and reduce the bananas and make mulch out of them as well. So yeah, it's just another chore as far as maintenance goes. I don't put them through the chipper, you just lay them on the ground direct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're perfect, they work well.
Would that be good for path? We were thinking as our pathway when we do our garden
Edges.
walking path, like the chopping the leaves down.
The leaves, you saw how leafy it was up here. You're better off with a woody one on your paths, it's much more durable.
Like sawdust, like
Yeah, like sawdust is good, otherwise just coarse wood chip that hasn't got leaf in it, so it's much slower to break down and it drains well. So yeah, come for a walk along here. Right. We just stopped here so we can have a look at some of the kiwi vine. So some of it's starting to flower now, so I'll know in a couple of months whether there's been any pollination between them, because I'm sure I've got a couple of females and one of these up here is definitely a male, so it's just a matter of getting that cross-pollination occurring before a fruit will be developed. So I may have to plant more males or try and spread pollen from one to the females just to hand pollinate, but that's a lot more work, so I'm not in favour of all that work. So.
How do you do that, with a brush?
Yeah, yeah. Yep, or maybe a blower. You just pick a few flowers and then hit it with a hairdryer or battery operated blower. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, these custard apples probably are in the wrong place. They're competing too much for the sunlight. I've got another good tree up further for that, so they may have to be sacrificed, because I'd rather have kiwi fruit. That was the long-term crop for that trellis. And that's the kiwi gold, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Right, so, and the parents that I got these root suckers from were planted from seed, and those seeds had a bit of genetic variability. Some of them were like kidney shaped and some were roundish like the standard gold ones were, but there was a mixture. But the taste, the flavour of all of them was identical to the kiwi gold that you buy. Absolutely divine taste and flavour. So well worth growing if you've got the space. Those that are underneath the avocado, have a look up above your head. So that's one of those trees that I was saying is acting as our pantry. It's going to hold those until I just progressively harvest them. There's 3 or 4 families that we feed, our sons and another relative of Andrea's that we give avocados regularly to them.
So did that fall off? Like, how do you get them off there if you want one?
Well, that's a good question. You remember one of the permaculture principles was use biological resources to do work.
Yeah.
Well, I send my grandson up the
I
tree.
thought so. I thought there's somebody climbing.
Or I can just use a telescopic hooker, which there's often less struggle than the grandson puts up. I'd have to use that productivity accelerator. The wood, yeah, the big chopper, yeah. Okay, I think there's a swale, there's 3 swales in here. So they're very subtle because it's only a very gentle slope. So I made them a couple of metres broad, and that was just designed for those catastrophic rainfall events when water flows across the surface. It won't flow past the swale because it's held there long enough to absorb, but it also means it's a good location for me to run an extra pipe that's got holes in it, and I think that pipe is up further, and there's another one down lower. So when my tanks are overflowing at the back of the house, I just turn on a valve that intercepts the water coming up the downpipe into the tank. So that water, instead of running into the tank and overflowing, it runs out and over to the orchard, and via that 2-inch pipe, which has got several 1/2-inch holes in it, so that water is dispersed along the whole length of that swale automatically, as long as I've connected the pipe and turned the valve on. That surplus rain will then be stored in the soil in each of those swales where I've got the pipe, and it's easy enough to, the next time it rains, I'll move that dripper pipe or that feeder pipe into the other swale or into the row in between, so that we share the excess across the orchard and store it at that greater depth in the soil, rather than just letting it overflow around the tank and
Make a big
nothing's
mess.
using it. Yeah, it becomes
Do
a
you do that yourself,
problem.
Derek, or just get a plumber in, or
I-
that's such a good
I
idea,
did-
I love it.
I designed the swales, and then I just supervised a bobcat that did the
Yeah,
earthwork.
Yep.
Yeah, but there's other machines that we'll look at this afternoon for swale construction.
Yeah, well.
Depends on the scale of the swale that you
I
want.
suppose the spale is probably put in before you plant it up, was it?
No, it was actually put in not long after I had planted them. The swale must be, but there's a crest. The crest is about here, so it's not very obvious, but water knows which way it'll flow.
And how do you know how big to make it and how, all that
Okay.
kind of thing? Is it just a guess?
A bit of a guess, yeah. Because it's a gentle slope, the water's not going to pick up much speed.
Yeah.
So it's just going to slowly percolate across the top through the mulch.
So you try and build the swale on a contour, and you can get contour maps with Google Maps now that
Yep.
show you exactly, and you can use your phone to find out exactly where the contour flows, and then you dig your drain along the contour.
Yeah, okay.
And then water just naturally flows on the contour.
Yeah,
You're directing the water around your farm sort of thing.
yeah. You can make your swale go slightly downhill if you wanted to. If you wanted to direct it into a dam or a tank that might capture it. But be careful not making it too steep, otherwise it will scour the soil as it's running.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
I used a bunyip level, which is just like clear plastic hose and two parts standing up that hold the hose, and there's clear section, so you can see when the water level is the same in each one. Right, so I know that if you calibrate them right so that they're both on the same surface, when you've got that level, you can say, right, that's when they're both level. So you just leave one on the level that you want it to be at, the finished height, and you move your hose across until that is the same height, so you know that that point is the same level as where the original one is, and then you mark that. So you say dig here, and you can use a laser level now, that's a lot easier.
Yeah, but that sounds like more fun.
It is, and you can make it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can look it up. Okay, well, let's move out. We must be getting close to 4 o'clock or something. Before we get on the bus, I think we'll have our little quiz. Remember, I threatened you with a quiz earlier this afternoon. So the first one will be a fairly simple question. And what is the name of one of our fashion models?
Felicity.
You got it.
Yes.
That's good enough.
Felicity.
He's quick off the mark. He gets both.
Thank you, Derek.
Okay, we'll make the next one a bit harder. And I'll get you to put your hand up before we yell it out. Okay. All right. Who can name 3 of the guiding principles that I read out at the beginning and that are posted on underneath the flying saucer gazebo? Who Who could name 3 of those principles that we talked about?
I'll try.
It's a bit hard.
Sharing with animals and people.
That's the ethic.
Oh, that's the
That's the
ethic.
third ethic,
Oh
is
no, I'm
giving back.
probably.
Oh no, I reckon I've got them mixed up.
Yeah, I think I got it mixed up.
These were the
Two.
guiding principles.
Okay. Next.
No, they're guiding. They're principles,
observing
as in things to guide your design, such as everything works in many ways.
Oh, everything has. Every one thing must have multiple functions.
Yeah,
Like that.
yeah, like that.
Your problem is your solution, or is that?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's the second one.
And
And you can give another one. Biological use.
Something. Yeah, biological control. Biological.
Grandson picking avocados. No, use biological resources to do work.
That's the one.
But anyway,
Yeah.
I'll give you those.
Thanks.
Now, this next one's going to be interesting because so this is the last question. I'm looking for the funniest answer, right? Let me just word the question right. So there's quiz shows on TV that sort of actors and celebrities have to come up with some funny answers to different sort of scenarios on these silly shows they have. So, what was your reaction when you lifted the lid? So I'm looking for the funniest answer. The funniest answer will win that. The worst answer will win a one of these chilies. Now, I have it on good authority that you'll need the fire tender on standby if you do have to eat that. Anyway, has anyone got a funny answer as to what you thought when you first lifted the lid and you saw that strange creature in the mirror?
It broke when I lifted it.
Right. Any other attempts?
I thought I need to shave.
Right.
We don't have a mirror at home.
I thought there was a woman behind me and I said, excuse me.
Okay.
A mannequin.
Is anyone else?
Hey.
Maybe you want to get a perm.
I think that's the best so far. Is it any challenges?
I knew I didn't. Sorry.
I think we'll give it to Alistair.
My wife can sip the water on my behalf.
I won't make anyone eat that, but if anyone thinks they are a
If Nitin was
fond
here, he'd be.
chili eater,
No.
no? I know people that have had it and regretted it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, you're welcome.
I was at a Thai restaurant there with with one of my son's friends, and he loved hot stuff. And when we went out, there's a sort of wizened old lady, the sort of matriarch, was taking the money, and she said, "Did you enjoy your food?" And he said, "Oh, it wasn't hot enough." And she said, "Here, try." And she's got a little chili bush on the thing, and so she gave him one. He said, "I'll have 2." And he threw them in his mouth and chewed them back and walked out. And I was next paying, and she said 10, 9, 8. He got to the middle of the road and fell on his knees screaming and ran back, "Milk, I've got that milk." And
Okay. I think is it about 4 o'clock now? Shall we
Exactly.
make our way to the bus and then we'll go to Kate and Wayne's place and we'll have a look at swales. Some of you have seen those little booklets. I'm not sure where they've ended up. Kate and Wayne might have gone, I think.
Wayne's gone, I stayed.
Oh, okay. But anyway, I'll get those booklets and I'll put them on the bus so people can share them. So there's just a series of photos of swales that have been designed and constructed on Norfolk. So it'll show the before and sometimes during and after with water in, and then that'll prime you up ready for seeing some new 3-year-old swales at this other property. We'll have a chat about that then. Okay, so everybody over to the bus, please. So would anyone like to have a look at the photos of the before while we're talking about them? Because this is where that. All right. Oh, okay. Well, just so this sequence is at the back, but there's another booklet there. Okay. So when you're ready, see you, Nathan. Okay. So at this property, Kate and Wayne had only just bought it and they wanted me to come and do some wood chipping work for them. So I was doing that, and then they were saying they were going to build their shed down here on this slope. And I walked over the property and I said, oh, it's not a good place for a shed. I think they'd got a quote for topsoil, and they're going to need something like $3,000 worth of topsoil to build it up to level before they put a concrete slab on top of that fill, and then they wanted a place where they could have a garden. So I looked at it and I said, well, you've got it back to front. There used to be a large greenhouse up the top where it's perfectly flat. They've scalped all the topsoil off it. It's not very good for growing up there because it's right down to the hard clay. And I said that would be a better location for your shed, and this would be a better location for your garden. So they thought about it and said, yeah, okay, well that's a good idea. We'll have to amend the plan that we've lodged with the council, which was a bit of a nuisance, but no real dramas. Jody was able to comply. And so I said, right, well if you've got this road here and you've got a road that goes up to your shed, all of that's going to be hardened off with gravel and continuous traffic that compact it. So there's going to be a lot of water that sheds off that access way and off from up there. So I said the best way that you can deal with that water is to have swales down here that intercept that water, hold it and let it soak in and give deep watering to all these plants that you put on the swales when you finish construction. So they agreed that that was a good way to go, and we contacted this local operator with, I think it's an 8-ton excavator. We had to remove quite a lot of bananas, as you might have seen in that first photograph. That was about all that was growing there, plus one big queen palm further along. So it was giving reasonable quantity of bananas, but the rest of it was just being managed by mowing. So we set about doing a draft about where the swales might go and how many, and which part of the hardened off area was going to be directing water to which swale, so that it was divided up a bit between the swales. It didn't all go into just the first one. We made it so that this hardened off area here could drain into the second swale, and then if that overflowed it went into the third one. And likewise the water off this section of the road here went immediately into the first swale, and the water that came off that hardened area, I think you designed it so it went into the second swale? Yeah, and then that overflowed into the third one. So we're trying to share. Yeah. So yeah, they're trying to spread the joy, so to speak, of that water, because that's the resource that they were trying to capture. Spread it between the swales, not evenly, but just roughly, so that it worked, and any overflow naturally from the higher ones would flow into the lower ones. So once we'd done a draft, we just marked it with a bit of paint on the ground, and that was the guide to the operator of the machine. And he had a laser level, which was very useful to just go along and check the depth of each swale to make sure that he was creating it level along the bottom, because that's the idea. Have it as much on a contour, because water will flow in both directions on a contour, and we wanted it dispersed evenly along that contour so it soaked in evenly along that entire length of that swale. So that was how we went about constructing it. So you saw a few images there of that machine working. Now the first step was to use that ripper that's there. So that's just called a ripping tine, and he could bury that to at least the full depth of that. He could bury part of the shaft or the shank above it as he tore it just through the ground. That was enabling air and moisture to go down deep. That was mainly on the part of the ground where the spoil was going to go, right? So before you put the spoil on, you deep rip there, because once you've got 500 mil of soil, that's 500 mil less depth that you're going to get by ripping it afterwards. So rip that one first, then change to that wider bucket, scoop out that shape, that profile. We'd sort of worked out what profile we wanted. We didn't want it to be steep and sharp. We wanted it to be fairly gradual so they could mow along the top edge and walk along comfortably. So that was all just part of the design. And then so he formed that by pulling that material across and gradually got a uniform height. We used the laser level on the top of the swale because that determined where the overflow would occur. The lowest point was where that water was going to run over first, and so we didn't want to create a narrow low point because it would scour out the loose soil and you'd lose the reservoir capacity of that swale as it carved a deeper and deeper channel through that little mound. So we tried to get it as uniform as we could across the top. You saw that sort of profile that we were trying to create, fairly gentle. And then you see what it looked like when it's had a few plants in and a bit of mulch around the individual plants. And that was specifically to keep chooks from scratching the mulch around those individual young plants. So we used a lot of the excess banana at its highest value, which was an anti-scratch material, something that was too heavy and coarse for chickens to scratch away and expose the soil around your plants and potentially, cause the plants to dry out and die prematurely. So that's another shot of that same angle looking back, looking from the other end down here. And it was absolutely bone dry when we were doing it. It was dusty. It was November 2019, I believe, when this all took place. And then subsequently, where's Kate? What rainfall event did you take these photos in?
That was earlier this year.
Okay.
We had a lot of rain.
Yeah, there was quite a few events we had a lot of rain. Yeah, right. Right.
It wasn't the biggest one, like where it flooded down Kingston or anything. It wasn't that one.
Okay.
It was the next one after that.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Well, this was substantial enough anyway from these photos, so.
I think it was like 100 mil or something like that.
Yeah.
It was a decent rain.
Yeah.
Can't remember which one. We've got too many.
So you can see by how deep those swales are, roughly how much water they could hold. There are ways that you could calculate it if you want to get into the academics of it. You can do little measurements and work out how many litres it might hold, but then you've got to allow for infiltration in the soil and all sorts of things that I don't bother with. It's immaterial.
It works.
It works, that's right. I knew it would work, but I didn't want to go overkill on the engineering, because the deeper you make them, the more it's going to cost you with the excavator. You'd have steeper slope coming in if you wanted to go deeper. Then you've got a higher mound on the other side and a steeper slope on your downhill side of the mound as well. So I think we got it pretty good. It's still gradual. It's not a very steep slope, but when you see how much water these swales collected, it shows you just how big this surface area of this catchment is. And they actually had water from behind his shed was coming down the side of the shed. I think that was in one of the images. No, I didn't give, oh yeah, I did give you that image there. Right, he just manually cut a channel from the back of the shed because his tank was overflowing at the back of the shed. So all this water was spewing out there, and he wanted to get it away from the shed before it went through his shed. And so ideally he should have a big pipe that takes it directly under the road and down there, but this got him out of trouble in the meantime. So the roof of the shed was actually contributing to the water that was running down here because the tank was overflowing. The tank couldn't hold it. It was just excess. But the swales were holding it. But Kate, did the bottom swale overflow into the
I didn't come
trees?
out in the rain, ask the person
Right.
who did.
No, it didn't. Right. Well, beauty.
He went to check on it.
Yeah. So the infiltration rate exceeded the influx rate of the water. So
And when the tank gets like reasonably full, I'll just the Pelicon.
Yeah.
We just gravity drain, fill in the Pelicon up, and I'll just turn it on a week later and empty it out. And next time there's rain, I'll fill that Pelicon up again. So you get 1,000 litres that would be usually.
So Wayne's called
Yeah.
it a Pelicon, other people call it an IBC tank.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
Sorry, this thing.
What I used to work, yeah. we call it
IBC
shuttle.
tank. Yeah, right. No, that's what he called it at work. Oh, sorry, yeah, I couldn't figure out what that was. Yeah, IBC. IBC, yep. So they call it. And then you open that up and then it's shuttle.
So the fact that it didn't overflow down the bottom means that your designer did a perfect job. I mean, he should have got a bigger bonus.
It's never too late, Mother.
We didn't know we needed swales until Derek told us we should have swales, but now we're really glad we have swales. So
Yeah.
we didn't know anything about them until Derek told us, and they've just been amazing what they've done.
Yeah.
And then it actually helped the groundwater too, like the reservoir down.
Yeah, it's stored in your soil,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't get to an aquifer or the groundwater level. It's at a depth where the bananas and the other fruit trees can get it. So it's basically drought-proofed these orchard trees just by that one-off earthwork structure.
Yep.
So that's the beauty of working with the soil. You only need a one-off construction phase, and then every time it rains you can rest inside and say, oh, our trees are getting irrigated again.
Yeah.
All the runoff off this road, all the runoff from the parking area where the bus is, the excess from the roof off the shed, the overflow from the tank, it's all contributing to keeping these things thoroughly wetted whenever it rains. So you would have noticed in some of the other photos, I can just show you them. Right, so you might remember that photo here. That's out at Anson Bay. That's on a property with, I forget how many acres, maybe 8 or 10 acres in total. There are 2 very large tanks. I think they might only be 20,000 gallon tanks each, but that's 40,000 gallons of storage, quite a lot. But there are 4 dwellings, like a residence, a studio flat, a workshop, a garage, and a bit of other stuff. Those roofs are all plumbed into these 2 tanks. So when those 2 tanks are full, you've got the equivalent of 4 roofs overflowing simultaneously from one source, the lowest of these 2 tanks. And it was creating a quagmire where that discharge from that tank was occurring. It was a boggy area regularly because you only needed 20 mils of rain, and the 4 dwellings feeding this tank, it got overflowing again and again and again. So I'd suggested to these people that we construct this swale to take the water away from that boggy area, which was just a problem for access, and they couldn't mow the lawn there half the time because it was too wet. So we designed this swale. It's about 70 metres long. So from here to that house, I guess, roughly up there. And we made it quite wide. It's a bit hard to see the actual profile, but the owner wanted to be able to manage it with a ride-on mower. So we had to make it very gentle slope in, and then fairly wide across the bottom, and then a gentle slope, and then a gentle fall on the downhill side. And it was fairly flat country, reasonably flat, about as same sort of slope as this. And it took 2 days with a bobcat to actually do it. We didn't have an excavator at that job. We just stuck with the bobcat. So there's the bobcat and Desiree. This is Troy Muir, for those that know him. And this photo was taken about, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 years later, when the CSIRO mounted a camera on a fence post, and that took a photograph every hour, I think it was, for about 6 months. So it was capturing a photo every time that it rained. There'd be images of the swale at different levels of filling. And the owner, when I got back to her after this original filling, maybe 12 months later, she said that that swale, which held about 10,000 gallons, right, that's a substantial sized tank, that swale overflowed 4 times in that first year. It was under-engineered. It should have had a second swale below it, or it should have been twice the holding capacity to take that overflow. And it still floods and overflows today because they've got the same roof catchment going in and the same tanks going out.
Grow there so that they use that water?
Well, it's pretty exposed to the ocean, and so it was only pasture that's growing there. So it's a little bit of a waste, but if you can get water into the groundwater there, that's better than letting it make a boggy area around the tank and just concentrating it in one location. It's going to soak in over a longer distance and a longer time.
Do you build up the swales with more compost or mulch? You just keep building on top of it?
You can do. That's what they're doing here. They're just remulching around their fruit trees every time they've got mulch. And the swale does settle down a bit over time because the rainfall will make it just pack down a bit tighter and a bit lower, so that's less storage capacity that it has. And it may, on a place like this, it may fill with sediment that's washed down off that road, so it'll be, coloured brown. I think we saw some brown coloration in the water, which indicates that it's got a lot of soil particles in it. So over time it will silt up in there. But it's also trapping any other organic matter that's carried down with it, so leaf litter and twigs and stuff, but also seeds that might be on that driveway there. So we go back to a previous one to that. So, whoops. All right. So that one there is on a cliff out at Anson Bay at Tom's place, where next to Jamie Rives's. And that photo was taken from the top of a pine tree growing on the edge of the cliff. And looking back was the only way I could get the photo. Only way I could photograph that particular landslip that had occurred there. So you can see the outline of where a landslip had occurred, a bit of a cliff there. Well, that all disappeared in one rainfall event back in the 1980s. Heavy rain, and it was coming down this slope here. That soil wasn't there, that's been brought in from another site. So you've got this little amphitheatre of a catchment and the pasture immediately above it. Well, heavy rain ran through that pasture and started to concentrate as it got further and further down the slope. The soil got saturated so deeply and it got so heavy that it actually started to slump. And so when it started to crack away, the water then flowed into that crack, and that helped to lubricate that mass of soil. And so it wasn't long before that whole lot just slid away. Continuous heavy rain continued to wash the last trace of that soil away. 200 cubic metres went over the cliff, and the grass had been washed clean. This is right next to you, Jim. So it was in my mind then, I've got to try and repair that to stop that eroding further and further back on that exposed face. And so I decided, when I built a dam on that same property, I stockpiled the soil until I was ready to push the soil back into here. So there's a shot of the bulldozer. It's not a very good photo, unfortunately, but that's a shot of the bulldozer pushing it over that cliff to the point where it looked like he was going to tip.
No safety cage on that one.
No. And it was a bit hairy. Yeah, you didn't have those photos in there.
Oh wow.
But that's how steep it was. You can see how that's vertical. He had nerves of steel, that guy. But anyhow.
It's almost like back 45 years ago when a ship was being unloaded, what the guys did then would make Australians look like pansies.
Yeah, nowadays they wrap themselves in cotton wool and bubble wrap if there's any chance of getting a sore finger. Anyway, so he pushed that material in progressively. It took a while before he had enough that he could actually venture onto the fresh soil, and it would automatically sink as it started compacting. So he'd back off, get some more soil, push it in further, and then he got down to here and he drove in the post with the weight of his bucket. I'd already had all these materials prepared. So once the posts were there, he then picked up these big gum logs in the bucket, and he could carry those down and place them against those posts as retaining logs. And then once the logs were there, he could push more soil up against them, build it up with a gentle slope, and then we'd put in more posts. I'd worked out there was going to be 4 or 5 tiers. So we just progressively... No, these were solid olive posts, so quite durable. I wanted them to last. Anyhow, when he'd finished, he'd used every last piece of that soil that was there, that stockpile. But he'd travelled over it so many times, he'd compacted all that soil above it. And so the next time that it rained heavily, the same phenomenon occurred. The runoff was concentrated, and it eroded the water on the leading edge, the soil at the leading edge. It washed underneath some of the logs. You can see how much it took out from there. That's Scotty standing in there, so that's a metre deep. There was at least 20 tonne of soil washed away, and as well as destabilising those logs. So then it dawned on me that we had only fixed the symptom, which was that collapse. We hadn't fixed the problem. The problem was in the stormwater management of the catchment, right? Yeah, and so that's when I did my first swales, was design these smaller swales, but because it was getting steeper, they were much smaller in profile and a bit closer together, so that they, through multiple action, they were able to stop the water from getting down to the bottom again to get down to here. And so after doing that work, that took 2 hours with the bobcat. That's all it took. He'd just get the bucket facing downhill, drive the bucket in, lift it up, drop it onto the spoil side, then skid across, in again, and just repeated all the way along the line that I'd marked with paint for him to follow. But yeah, 2 hours worth of bobcat, and then I went out. Next time it was really raining heavily. I was really surprised that where the land was flatter up here, as probably as flat as that, there was water running through the grass, the pasture. There was 40 mils deep. Wow. Even though there was that gentle a gradient, and the soil is as porous as what we know it is, that was still exceeded the ability of the soil to absorb that much rain. That's how intense the rainfall was. And so that water hit the first swale and it flooded it. And it went into the next swale and it flooded that, because it wasn't a very big capacity, but there was quite a big catchment. But then by the time it got to the third swale, it was dissipated along the swale enough that the combined infiltration, it didn't burst that third swale, and so no erosion water got to that edge where the erosion had occurred up here. So no more water went through here other than what fell on it out of the sky as rain. And so I breathed a sigh of relief that no longer was this going to just wash away. And we eventually planted cassia and a few Norfolk, a few Kentia palms, I should say, not Norfolk ones, and a few Norfolk pines. Planted some natives in this area on the terraces, because what we lost in that 200 cubic metres was wedge-tail shearwater burrows. So there was a lot of burrows there that just gone. So goodness knows, I don't know if there was birds in the burrows at the time that it happened, but it was all part of the habitat of them, for them. And the idea with these logs was that when the birds are trying to build a new burrow, they'll come up against an obstacle and then start digging down under it. So those logs were perfect because they were irregular and had little ups and downs. So there were these little curves where it was easy for them to get under and start digging a new burrow if there was a shortage of habitat for birds that wanted to move in. There was plenty of opportunity. So there's now wedge-tail shearwaters nesting in here again, which is really inspiring to see it. And we just haven't had that any more erosion since these swales here were done. So the purpose of those swales was purely to prevent further erosion and loss of that cliff, because we're losing land. Yeah. Right. So we
repairing that second damage or that damage?
No, I didn't bother spending money on repairing it.
Yeah.
It was too awkward to get a truck down there to dump soil, and they would have had to negotiate the swales as well.
Grass just growing over it, or?
Now it's vegetation mostly. Yeah, there's a lot of young pines that have come up from seed nearby. No, not here. No, the only recent pictures are really the first one that showed some revegetation efforts that I did before we did the repair job. So I planted casuarinas and I planted pines and oaks. Some of them survived, some of them didn't, but the casuarinas are still there. They were quite good to use on that steep cliff area because they've got a habit of sending up adventitious shoots, they're called. So it's like the running bamboo.
So it anchors itself?
Yeah, it'll propagate itself. And so I didn't care if it colonised that whole cliff, and you could deal with it if it grew up the top, but there's not much you could grow up the top because it's so exposed to the salt wind. It's right at the edge of the cliff. So there wasn't much potential for planting, crops or veggies, yeah. Yeah, it was nearly impossible to try and grow anything there. And yeah, so anyway, that's a success story. It's all rehabilitated with vegetation now, and that's further stabilised it. The swales have softened considerably now with, I don't know, 20 years of deposition of a bit of sediment and a bit of organic matter that's been washed down there, and leaf litter from the trees that are above them now. So, but anyway, it's much more stable. So I think there's one more. Yeah, this was.
Thank you.
That's right. I was giving back to the earth because there was no way I was going to get any return from it. It was just purely to protect that coastline from further degradation. So your land is just as exposed to landslips. So
we're a bit lucky. It's almost like a saucer. A lot of it, you got the cliff, and then a lot of it slopes inland.
Yeah, but the end.
Yeah.
The end bit does.
Yeah.
Off. You just want that as vegetated.
Yeah.
But we're quite lucky. A lot of the water. You've got that valley.
That's where it discharges. Yeah. Yeah, you could put swales in the catchment and reduce that amount that's going out off the cliff and plant more natives on those swales.
That's what we've been trying to do, actually.
Yeah.
We got James to take the cattle out because it was just the hillsides were just getting big.
Yeah.
We thought, wow, it's all going to erode.
Yeah, it just promotes erosion by having bare soil. The cows push their hooves through the burrows of the seabirds. Yeah. So that's not good for them. So there was one last example, and that was the property next to where we were today, where the bamboo is growing. So there was 4 or maybe 5 swales, I think, done there. That's because I had intentions of growing my avocados and bananas and everything there. And so we knew from past experience that when we had heavy rain on the airport property, there was a long slope down towards my place called the runway in safety area, and it hadn't been built up at that stage. So when it rained heavily, that slope, which was quite steep, shed all that water down onto the driveway that goes down to McCoy's place, at the back of that hedge where we were standing at the ice cream bean. So yeah, the wheel tracks were they turned to rivers, and then it spilled off there further down and into that property where these swales were constructed. So the swales were designed to intercept that water where it ran off and then overflow one into the other on the downhill side, and that was where the plantings were. That's where the avocados were transplanted from. So they were doing very nicely. But so you can see that I'd trialled different machinery to do it. Because they were long runs, we could try using a grader, and he'd just set his blade at the right angle and then just do a long straight run, and he could shift a lot more soil quicker than a bobcat could manoeuvre and dump and also probably a bit quicker than what an excavator could do. He'd still got to move. Yeah. Whereas this was, once he started, it was just continuous. So he could do 100 metres and then he'd have to turn around and adjust the angle of the blade and come back again to create the profile that we wanted. And then it was about August, I think, 2008, just before, or the day before the minister declared the runway in safety area project to commence, where they were going to build it up with like 150,000 cubes of soil to satisfy CASA, who required a 90-metre extension of the runway as a safety area. They couldn't, that steep slope was too dangerous. You couldn't use that as an overrun area or a pre-landing area. You'd end up flat in against the side of it and in a real mess. So on that Sunday before the day of the commencement of this project, it had already been raining, so the ground was already quite wet. But then we got a downpour of the Met Office recorded 19 millimetres in 15 minutes. But that's how long it lasted. If it had lasted longer, well, the result would have been even greater amount of water. But so that's equivalent to about 75 millimetres an hour, so 3 inches in an hour. And so that shows you the volume that was spewing off out of that driveway. The driveway intercepted it, right? It had these little, they became the channels. It spewed into there, it filled that swale. I designed it so that it would overflow roughly in the middle of the swale and then be intercepted by the one below it. So there was just a slight fall. And then the second swale, you can see how much it's overflowing here at once. Second swale overflowed, third swale overflowed, and there was a short one in between that it overflowed. And this is the last swale before it ran into Dids's property next door, the market garden, where some of us went the other day. So that's how much was running out after my swales had intercepted it, and after allowing for the amount of infiltration over that distance of swale. That's how much went into the neighbours. It washed out 20 tonnes of young veggie seedlings in his valley and dumped all of that sediment where he parks his vehicles. So it created a mess on his property. But if I hadn't had the swales there, how much more might he have lost? And so I'd intercepted as much as my swales could hold. But that's still how much was escaping the property. So again, it was under-engineered for a rainfall event of that intensity. So, and now the new owners have modified it so that it no longer goes into that series of swales. So I can't. It just Dids's. Well, it comes onto the property where it comes onto the property that's one property removed from mine, and that's where that runs into theirs. But after the runway extension safety area was done, they put their own tail drain in. I asked the Minister for the Environment at the time if I could please have that water going into my swales, and he said, "Oh no, I'm sorry, we can't have you doing that because you or the next owner might come back and sue the government for damage caused by that stormwater that's come off the council's land or the government's land." So they built a big expensive tail drain that intercepted any runoff from that new structure. It went into a big settling pond at the end, and then there was a channel that went into the neighbour's property, into his creek and out via Headstone. So the neighbour had the same amount of overflow going through his property, but I wasn't allowed to have it come onto mine where I'd had structures there designed to cope for it. So anyway, you can only do so much and throw up your hands when you're ignored. So.
Sometimes common sense is lacking.
So I'm with the work that we've done with the CSIRO. They actually included swales as one of the solutions to stormwater management and water conservation on Norfolk Island, and swales are one of the suggestions for increasing the groundwater storage, mitigating the amount of flow that goes into the Emily Bay, for example, via Watermill Creek, but also any of the creeks. So any land like yours that's got steep country in particular with large catchments above it, swales are the means of getting water back into the groundwater.
That's a good idea.
And if you've got a protected area where you can have a swale and then you plant your avocados or your bananas and whatever like this, you can have growth like this. This is 3 years old. So that sort of concludes the presentation, but if there's any more questions, you can ask. So